record. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and I will raise them to Katie to answer those questions as we go through, or we may save them till the end. But let's go ahead and get started. Again, thank you all for joining. I am Sarah Grover, your Executive Director for the Volusia County Bar Association. And just a reminder that we do have the Bench and Barbecue coming up on April 16th. That is at the Brannon Center again. And we have 3 honorees this year. We have Judge Rouse, Peyton Quarles, and George Pappas, who are honoring this year for the Bench and Barbecue. So registration for that is open. So please join us for the Bench and Barbecue. It's our biggest and best event of the year, in my opinion, and it's a great time for everybody to get together in a more, casual setting and get to chat around dinner, and then a great program as well this year. So to get started, I want to say thank you to Katie for hosting this remote online notarization in Florida, legal framework technology and risk management for attorneys. Katie is a Florida commissioned notary public and remote online notary with extensive experience conducting and supervising remote online notarizations for legal, real estate, and business transactions. Katie's worked closely with attorneys and law firms to implement compliant remote notarization workflows and technology solutions. She also has practical experience with identity verification technologies, credential analysis, and Florida approved remote online notarization platforms. Her professional focus includes compliance education, risk mitigation, and the operational application of remote notarization technology within legal practice. So again, thank you so much, Katie, for doing this for us. I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be able to present today. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. If you do have any questions, feel free to either put it in the chat, and then Sarah's going to go ahead and do me a solid and let me know. But otherwise, I will leave a time frame in the end. So if you do have any questions, we can go ahead and go over that. Um, so this is. Just to reiterate, the presentation for remote online notarization in Florida, we're going to go over the legal framework, the technology, and risk management specifically for attorneys. And then also there is the handy dandy course number just in case that is what you're here for. All right. Okay, so the overview of remote online notarization, this is what we're going to go over. We are going to touch on the statutory and regulatory framework, the technology requirements for valid remote online notarizations, the ID verification, and then also credential analysis standards, and then also compliance considerations for you as the attorney or for the firm. So that way you can make sure that you are doing the best for your clients. Okay, so a little bit more about me is that I am the previous remote online notary compliance for 2 different platforms at 2 different times. For one for Blue Notary and then another for Pro Notary. I was the chief marketing officer. I did sales and executive um, uh, marketing for them, and then also made the framework for onboarding. So I worked with different notaries, different companies like title companies, law firms, and everything, just so that way they could get up to date. So I am commissioned in the state of Florida. I own Notary SWFL, which is a remote online notarization platform, where I have other notaries under me, and we are able to take care of notarizations. Okay, so just an overview of how this works, just in case someone is coming on and has never heard of this. The easiest way that I like to explain it is that it is a combination of Zoom and DocuSign combined on a secure platform where the signers will go ahead and go through ID verification where they upload their ID. Sometimes they will ask a series of questions and have to answer that, and then do a face scan. So that is the general overview of how everything works, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. So the framework that allows us to be able to do this is the State Statute 117. So I wanted to go ahead and let you know that I'm going to provide a link for you at the end of this. If you want, I can send out this whole entire framework. but basically it's chapter 117. And then the specifics of anything that you might have questions on is going to be over in part two. So that gives you the actual um, overview of what is and is not allowed. Because sometimes it is called into question and it is good to brush up on this. So I'm giving you the resources that way you can go and do some education independently. So the other thing that also helps basically back us up on being able to do this, even if you are Act of 1999. This is also just, some people just call it Utah Act. And so this gives the legal framework basically saying that it is, even if it is in electronic form, it should be recorded and acceptable for different states and counties, irregardless of if it's remote or not. Now, we're going to get into a little bit more of some of the issues with that because we know that even though it says it, that doesn't always happen in real life. So we're going to get into some of that as well. Okay, so the jurisdictional requirements. Back in the day, I have always heard horror stories about how when this first came out, people basically just didn't know how to do it correctly, didn't follow the frameworks, and basically thought that they could just have their signers sign it, and then a notary would watch through Zoom, and then they would send it over. Like there was a lot of different misinformation about how to do this. So we're going to go into it as far as how to do it correctly because it's not the wild, wild west anymore. We have to make sure that we're following the correct frameworks. So. I just wanted to let you know that even though a Florida RON can be legally valid, it can still be rejected if the acceptance is not evaluated. So basically, you can state that that particular county should be able to record it, but there have been cases where a law firm or a title company or even a remote online notarization company has had to take legal actions against that recording office just so that way that document will get through. And so even though it should be accepted, sometimes that has happened where it is not accepted. Could be the recording office is having a bad day, or it could just be that they are, not aware of some of the laws and the framework that is around that. So usually what ends up happening is let's say I'm recording in Palm Beach County and there's a divorce that I want to make sure that they can do during remote online notarization. What I'll do is I'll just call up that county and make sure that they will take a remote online notary, um, take a remote online notarization document like a MSA. And then also I'm like, okay, perfect. Can you go ahead and send that over to me in writing? So that way I have a little bit more of a backup just in case it is something that could run you into issues. Typically, Florida is going to be a very lenient state for remote online notarization, but if you run into working with clients that are in other states, specifically California, you will sometimes run into issues with the recording offices accepting these types of notarizations. The other thing that I do also want to point out is that sometimes even though they are able to take the recordings, sometimes there's more steps that the remote online notary or your office will have to take in order to accept it. So sometimes there's different paperwork that has to be recorded at the same time of uh, inputting these types of notarizations. Um, so it can just sometimes be hit or miss. Okay, so attorney responsibilities and oversight. In general, you want to make sure that who it is that you are working with is going to be above board. There are the bar for becoming a notary is very, very low, so it is very, very easy to become a notary. You want to make sure that you are working with people that are taking care of getting commissioned, but then also making sure that they are following the letter of the law. So you should be able to see through each state the notaries credentials. So it's called the Notary Commission. You want to make sure that you are looking them up if this is the first time that you are working with them. And then they also have to be a registered remote online notary. So if you look me up, it's under Catherine Tremulis. You'll be able to see that I am a remote online notary in the state of Florida. You'll be able to see when my commission ends and all of the ins and outs of my actual commission. Um, the other thing is that your notary that you're working with has to use a compliant RON platform. And so if they are doing it through Zoom, that is not enough. And so for the state of Florida, they have a outline of the different RON platforms that they have available. And so you want to make sure that whatever notary company that you are working with, or if you have implemented it within your firm, that you are using the correct type of RON platform because there's a lot of different platforms out there. They do not all comply with the state of Florida. So the other thing is that if you are working with a notary that is not in your office, you can ask to retain the records yourself. Usually that's a really, really good rule of thumb because it has happened where let's say I do a notarization for someone and then I fall off the face of the planet. And so you still need the documents and I have not provided it for you yet, or you need the recording because something gets called into question. If I fall off the face of the planet, it can be very, very difficult for you to get that type of paper trail. Usually, you can go to the platform that the notary did the notarization for, but that can create issues. So, the better practice is to just ask for the recording at the same time as getting the document notarized. So that way, there's no, like, you basically want to button up everything in real time. Um, So typically, I provide the recording, the audit trail, and the document all at the same time. So the thing that you want to make sure is that you're providing valid notarizations to your clients.
Hey, Katie,
Yes.
could you provide the website to verify Ron? Do you?
Like yes, yeah. So there's two. Yes, I will do that. There's two separate ones. There's the framework for finding or vetting the actual RON notaries themselves, and then also I will put in the state approved remote online notarization platforms as well. Yes, I will
Okay, great.
do that.
Thank you.
Um, okay. So the legal risks and liability exposure for if you do not follow this or if your notary does not follow this is that it can be invalid. So obviously that is not the best. Also, they are unrecordable, or there are challenges to authenticity or execution. So let's say that you are a notary that is doing this, but I don't ask you the script. So there is specific things that remote online notaries have to ask their signers. If I just am like, okay, let's sign it, that is not going to be compliant, and so that can call into question whatever it is that I am notarizing for that time frame. So you want to make sure that when your notaries are doing this, they are asking the state required script. Okay. So the requirements for a valid remote online notarization, the framework for what we're looking for to make sure that this is going to be something that is going to stick. Now, I used to have to do the audits for two of the different platforms. So I saw the remote online notaries that were going through and doing these notarizations. And I will say that it is in your best interest to get the recording of what these notaries are doing to make sure that they are following the correct framework because, again, the bar is very low to become a notary. The training out there is not always the best. So you want to make sure that you are covering yourself and your clients by making sure that they are following this. Okay, so the notary has to be properly commissioned for remote online notarization. It is not enough in the state of Florida for them to be an in-person notary. They have to be a RON. There's extra steps, there's extra things that they have to buy, there's training that they have to go through. It is not enough. So the other thing is that they have to have real-time audio and video communication. I have had to stop notarizations if I cannot see or hear their clients. You cannot just bully your way through doing a notarization if you cannot see or hear your clients. So the other thing is the creation and retention of an audio video recording. Typically, for the RON compliant platforms that you're working for or working with, they provide the video retention storage for you. And then that is a 10-year period. So that platform has to save that for 10 years. That is the state compliant requirements for them. And so usually you don't have to be on the hook for that. It's a really good rule of thumb for you to cover all of your bases just to have that anyway. So the other thing is that the signers have to go through ID verification. So if I personally know someone, I can go ahead and choose individually as the notary that I can make them not go through the ID verification. But in general, for this, all of your signers have to go through ID verification unless your notary personally knows that client. And so there's two things that they have to do. So we do two-factor authentication for when we're going through this. The first one is that either they do the knowledge-based authentication questions or a biometric face scan and the ID analysis. So, regardless of how they are doing this, they have to show their ID, and then they also have to go through a secondary step of either the knowledge based authentication questions or the biometric face scan. Sometimes it's a good rule of thumb just to do all three, just to kind of make sure that you are covering all of your bases. But that is the frameworks for the ID verification. Um, that is something that you will be able to see for when you are looking at the audit trail for your remote online notaries is what type of ID verification that the notary put the client through. So the other things that you want to make sure is that your notaries are putting the proper venue and then the certificate language. Typically, that is for when I'm working with contractors, just to make sure that they're putting everything that they should. Uh, I'm we're talking I'm talking to a bunch of lawyers, so usually the certificate language is not something that comes up, but also make sure that if your notaries are in a different location, so let's say I'm in a different county, you want to just make sure that that reflects that. So then you also want to make sure that they're using an approved RON platform. We already kind of went into that. Um, the other thing that I also wanted to let you know about is the proper script and vetting. And so, one of the things that you have to make sure, and this is recorded within the statutes, is that your notary is asking the proper questions for when they are going through the ID verification, for when they are going through the notarization. And so, I have a script that I ask every single time. You know, are you aware of the contents that you are signing? You know, are you doing this of your own free will? So you want to make sure that your notaries are following a checklist and then also the script, so that way there is never anything that is called into question. So then the other thing is that they are using the tamper evident technology. That is something that is gone over within the platforms. So you will be able to see when you are going through this. Let's say I do a notarization and I send it over to Sarah. She would be able to see the document PDF itself, but on the back end, there's going to be a KPI encryption. So that way it shows if it's tamper evident proof or not. So if there's someone that came in and was doing a will and then they decided that they were going to get everything instead, so they pulled it up into Adobe and then changed some stuff around, that would show. And so you would be able to see the original and then you would be able to see the broken chain. And so that is typically through a provider called IdenTrust, but each platform will have their own set of encryption. So that way it protects the client and the actual document from any tamper evidence that is happening afterwards. Okay, so this is also something that is a question that comes up a lot is the physical location requirements. This is exactly from the chapter one set, like the actual state statutes, just so that way you don't have to take my word for it. So the notary must physically be in Florida. So if I'm doing a notarization and I'm commissioned in the state of Florida and I go over to Colorado for a ski trip, I cannot do the notarizations for any of your clients, any of my clients. I can't do any legally valid notarizations. The workaround for that is to hire someone that is uh, delegate it out to someone that is in the commission state that they're able to do that. But if you are a firm that only has one notary and she goes on vacation over to Vancouver, she's on vacation. You're going to have to find an alternative. You cannot use a VPN. And so I see it, and so I'm letting you guys know that that is not something that will be enforceable. And so it can call into whatever it is that you're getting notarized into question. The platforms will be able to see if your notary has been using VPNs. And so I would rather you just not do that at all and just go with a different remote online notary that is within their state. So that is something that has become an issue. So just make sure that you are one, vetting your notaries, and then if you have in office notaries that are working but then going on vacation, find an alternative, find a different notary that's within the state that they're commissioned in. So that is a little bit of a soapbox moment, but the other thing is that the signers can be anywhere. So the validity of an online notarization performed by an online notary public registered in this state shall be determined by applicable laws, regardless of the physical location or of the principal or sorry, I cut that off on accident. Witnesses at the time of the notarial act. And so basically, your principal or the signers and the witnesses can be anywhere, but you, as the notary, have to be within your commission state. So, do we have any questions about that? Because sometimes there comes up some questions. No? Okay. Okay, so this is another thing that I wanted to really highlight because if you are working with estate planning or if you are working with any of the documents on the right-hand side, you want to make sure that there are going to be extra things that you have to do. So your notaries or your firm will have to take extra steps if this is happening. So this is particularly for the documents that regularly get called into question. Any of the things that you will see on the right-hand side, you're going to want to double check. So even though we are able to do it remotely, we want to make sure that we are doing this correctly. So over on the left-hand side, it just kind of goes over all of the documents. And then we're going to show you that your I do it a little bit differently, but your platform should be asking the questions for making sure that they are not a vulnerable adult. And so this is the platform that I typically use. So when I am getting it set up for my clients, they have to go through the ID verification and all of these other things. And I toggle on that they have to do the Florida vulnerability screening that asks them these three questions on the right-hand side. And so if they do answer in affirmative to those questions, then you have to basically take care of these with kid gloves. So just as we are going through with these, usually it's a case by case basis if you want to go forward with a remote online notarization or not, just because these can be so tricky. So I really wanted to point this out that if you are working with any of these, wills, revocable trust, healthcare advance directive, succession agreement, waiver of spousal rights, or power of attorney, that your notaries typically are going to have these questions asked of your signers. So this one can be, it is one of the more missed notarization points for when you are doing these types of documents. So the other thing is that if you are doing any of the previously talked about notarizations for those types of documents, you are also going to have to ask these extra questions as the notary, or um, technically these questions have to be asked in general if the witnesses are not in the same location as your signer. So let's say Jane Doe is getting your will signed, and the two witnesses are provided by the notary company, and they're in a different location. The notary or these questions have to get presented during the notarization in general on record. And so otherwise, it can be called into question as far as the validity of what it is that we're notarizing. This is one of the more missed notarization questions for those types of things. So I really, really wanted to highlight this. This is very, very easy to miss within the state statutes, and it is also not taught in any of the state training. So you just kind of have to search through the statutes to be able to find this information. Okay. So the other thing that you want to look into is this is something that I don't necessarily teach on, but this is something to be aware of, is that qualified custodian is something of an extra uh, thing for when you are recording wills. Um, it is typically going to be an extra step. And then also, it is sometimes increasingly difficult to find a remote online notarization company or be a remote online notary that can qualify as a qualified custodian. If you are looking for someone that can do this, please just reach out to me. I have a different company that I recommend that does follow all of the bells and whistles of doing this. But typically, this is something of an extra step for when you are recording wills. Okay, so this is something that is kind of common sense, but sometimes the recording office and the acceptance and rejection issues is if they are missing elements of the notarial block. So if you are working with a notary that might not know the 8 different elements that you need for a notarial block, and let's say they forget one of them, it can be rejected. So if you are going through the notarization and you get it back from that notary, make sure that you are going through and the most common one that I see is that they are missing the checkbox for if it is in person or remote. So if you are working with old forms, just make sure that you are updating that to reflect that it is an indication if the notarization is in person or remotely done. And then also, sometimes the recording offices will not take in remote online notarizations without both the audit trail and the certificate of completion. So most of the platforms that we are working with will give you some sort of basically authenticity, um, to say like, yes, this notarization did happen at this amount of time and blah, blah, blah. So it's just like a little bit of a certificate of authenticity. That is something that is common. And so you'll be able to kind of see based on the county that you're working with if they accept it or not. Okay. So, the identity verification and credential analysis. When you are going through this, your signers will sometimes run into issues with going through the analysis or have questions about this. So I want to let you know that the way that I explain this to my clients is that it is the same as uploading a check into a banking app. So if you are able to deposit a check, you'll be able to do this. So they have to take a picture of the front and the back of their ID, and then usually they have to just take a selfie and then go through the knowledge base authentication questions. Okay, so the knowledge-based authentication versus credential analysis. Basically, the framework for this is that this is very, very important. I want to kind of highlight this, is that the identity proofing is a process to be able to go through where basically the platform will verify that they are who they say they are. And so they have to go through the knowledge-based authentication questions or biometric verification. This is something that is very, very controversial within our industry, at least for if you are working with real estate. And so if you are working with real estate and you're working with underwriters, typically they're only going to allow knowledge-based authentication questions. So that is something that you can ask. That is something that you can ask for your notary. Yes, Sarah.
Hi. A question came in. Does Zoom or Teams offer templates for Ron?
So Zoom or Teams would not cover the requirements for the RON software. So when you are working with Zoom, it is not secure enough to cover all of the aspects that you would need. I believe Zoom is partnered with DocuSign for remote online notarization. And so you would have to go through the actual platform itself to be able to do these compliantly. Um, I hope that kind of answers the question. But Zoom and Teams by itself is not going to be sufficient to be able to have all of the ID verification that needs to go through or the tamper evident technology on the back end to be able to support the actual documents being remotely notarized.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Um, I hope that answers that question. Um, Okay, so then yeah, basically the knowledge-based authentication questions or the biometric verification, which is the face scan. Okay, so biometric standards is face scan. This is something that we are talking about within the state statute specifically for real estate. But as of right now, what is supported is through the platforms. So it's not really something that you will have to deal with a lot. This is more on the platforms of like, let's say Blue Notary or if you go through Pactima, they're the ones that are going to take the heavy hitting of researching these laws and making sure that they're staying compliant in that way. But basically, it's a face scan. Your signers are going to have to hold it up in front of them and then go to the left and the right, and that is to help prevent deep fakes. When you are working with knowledge-based authentication questions, just as a little bit of an overview, if you've ever logged into the DMV and they ask you a series of questions that you have to answer within a specific amount of time, that is the knowledge-based authentication questions that you will see on a remote online notarization platform. And so it'll be those questions like, have you ever been associated with this type of address? Have you ever owned this type of car? What is the address of the last place that you lived? And so usually you have to answer a specific amount of questions in a specific amount of time, and that is called knowledge-based authentication questions. Typically, the software that is used for that is called LexisNexis. But the other thing that I also wanted to point out is that if you have clients that are international, if you have clients that are elderly, if you have clients that are investors, the knowledge-based authentication questions are not going to be the way to best serve your clients. Typically, you're going to want to have them go through the biometric face scan instead. And so it doesn't mean that they aren't who they say they are. It could just mean that they've owned 5 different companies and bought and sold 15 different cars within the last year, and they can't remember the make and model that they used to own in 2006. And so, obviously we want to work within the limitations of our clients. And so the workaround is the biometric face scan. So just as a little bit of a side note, if you do work with real estate, usually the biometric face scan they don't really like. So that is something of a consideration is that usually you have to go through the knowledge-based authentication questions.
You may be getting into it. Sorry, I think you are getting into it. But since there's specific software for Ron, which ones do you
Mhm.
recommend? Are you getting into that right now?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, so it depends on the use case. We can go, actually, this is something that of my I'm very well versed in this. So in general, it depends on what you're doing. So if you're working with clients and you don't necessarily care about the price points, I like Pactima the most. That is the one that I use. It is $20 a month and then $15 each session. But I find it to be more user friendly. And also, Pactima does not advertise to your clients. And so that is the one that I typically use the most. The downside with that one is that you cannot typically use that for real estate transactions if you're working with underwriters. That is it's not approved by all of the underwriters. And so for Pactima, or if it's not approved by the underwriter, it doesn't mean that that platform is not necessarily safe. It just means that they haven't gone through the time and money of getting approved by those specific underwriters. Um, so some other ones to
You
look
could
at.
you spell that for me? Sorry.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Pactima is called Pictima.
Pictima.
Sorry, I can
Or if you put it in the chat.
Pactima.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so yeah, I like Pactima. A couple other ones to look into is Blue Notary. I used to work directly for them. I was their notary relations director. If you go over there, you'll see a lot of my videos. Um, that one is very affordably priced. And then the other one that I would look into is also the probably one of the older ones, and it's called Proof. Um, so you'll be able to look at those three different ones. They're approved by the state of Florida. For my company, I have a lot of different platforms because I have so many different use cases that I work with. So unfortunately, it's not really like a Goldilocks situation where one size fits all. You kind of have to see which one works best for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so the RON platform technology and compliance standards, we kind of already went into this, but you have to make sure that whatever platform that you are working with is Florida compliant. So they have to have the record retention and storage of 10 years. It is maintained by the software provider. It is always a good idea for you to maintain your own records, especially if you're working with a different company where, they might shut down or it might be hard for them to get in touch with. So that way you're not scrambling for the recording of the notarization. I myself have had to provide a recording of a notarization for a client that was stating that they weren't physically there. And so that was an interesting one where, I mean, the client was there. And so we had to give that recording out to that client. I don't know what happened with that. I think it was pretty open and shut from that point on because when I'm doing the notarizations, a good rule of thumb for everybody that is doing this is that I have them legally state their full legal name. I have them hold up their driver's license. So that way it is all on camera that that person is who they say they are. And then I go through and I basically say that I'm visually inspecting the ID. I read off the front of the ID number, and then verbally state the expiration date as well, just so that way I know that that ID isn't expired as well. So that has been some of the more interesting things that have happened with notarizations. So, which we can get into if you guys have questions about. I have stories for days for that. Okay, so the data security and privacy, usually for when I'm working with my notaries, I require them to put on two-factor authentication questions or two-factor authentication for when they are logging into any of their platforms. Also, if I'm working at a different location, I keep my computer on me at all times, but basically they have to have a locking computer. Um, the other thing is that you cannot share your login information for other people. That has been something that has been an issue in the past. So you cannot share your commission information or you cannot share your login information. There are different platforms that allow admins in so that way they can be the ones that are pre-tagging, they can be the ones that are sending out the invitations. But if you are your own notary and you have your own platform, you cannot give it to someone else to be able to notarize documents on your behalf. So anyway, so also for most of these platforms, they're going to be MISMO approved. That is just basically an extra step for the mortgage association. So it's like standard for mortgages. And then also SOC 2 approved. So that is something that you want to look into just to make sure that they are keeping everything secure. But that is something to kind of vet the platforms with. Okay, so practical technology issues with Ron. I'd be lying to you if I said that everything is always rainbows and amazing with remote online notarization. It is very much a technical thing, and for the general population, that can be very, very tricky. And so when you are starting out with this, one, the way that you frame your notarizations to your clients are going to be the reason if they accept it or not. And so typically what I say is, why don't we just try it? And then if it doesn't work, I can have you come into the office or I can go out to you or I can send someone out. And so it kind of takes off the pressure from them. But the other thing is that I send over a good amount of different emails that explain the process. It explains how to get signed on. And then typically my notaries will go ahead and call the client just to have them overview the process. And so it's the same way that I explain it to you is the way that my notaries or I will explain it to the signers. Okay, basically you're going to get a invitation to you. You're going to go ahead and click on it. You're going to ID verify yourself just so that way I can make sure that you are who you say you are. And then we're going to meet during a session. It's very much like Zoom, but you're going to be able to see the document. I'm going to ask you a couple questions and then we're going to go through the whole entire thing. Um, it does not matter what software that you use. Sometimes you have clients that are going to have issues regardless. Sometimes, believe it or not, they don't read the emails. And so you want to make sure that you are a little bit proactive instead of reactive for these types of things. Okay. The other thing to look into, or just to make sure as like a little bit of a reminder, is that if you are working with clients that are out of state or out of country, to make sure that you are doing the correct time zones, and then also scheduling. So my company takes care of it if you decided to go with me, but in general, make sure that you are, let's say your client is over in Croatia, because it doesn't matter where they are. You want to make sure that you're saying, okay, at 6 o'clock in EST, would that work for you? Otherwise, everything is going to be a little bit wonky. So, the requirements for the client, because that is going to be something that they're going to ask a lot, like, okay, what do I need for this? Very, very simple. They need internet, they need their phone or laptop, and then they need their driver's license or passport. Um, Usually, if it is expired, I just tell them to get a new one. There are ways around it, but it is a little bit tricky. Usually, it is involving a credible witness, actually, two credible witnesses, which is a can of worms. But in general, technically, you can do it. It's just not as easy. Um, for all of the platforms that I talked about today, they allow phones to be able to do the notarizations as the signers. So it could be as easy as, let's say I'm the signer, I go onto the phone, I do go through the ID verification, and then we go ahead and knock it out. I usually recommend a laptop because it is 10 times easier to have them navigate through a notarization when they can fully see the entire screen. But if you are in a pinch, that is something that you are able to let them do. Um, if it's like a full closing or if it's a full real estate package or let's say a estate planning package with like 132 pages, I wouldn't recommend a phone, but it is something that is available. So this is actually out of the correct area. But for your remote witnesses, they have to be typically the state statutes will outline this, but they have to be over this age of 18. They have to be an unbiased party, and then also they have to be within the United States. So typically, what I have them do is if it's a new witness that I've never worked with before, I have them go through the ID verification, and then they have to state their name and then also that they are within the United States and over the age of 18. If you are working with witnesses and they are working on quitclaim deeds or any type of deed that need to be recorded within the state of Florida, make sure that they are comfortable with giving out their full address because that is something that needs to be recorded. That is something that changed about a couple of years ago, but sometimes it catches people off guard. So I just kind of like to give them a little bit of an overview that my witnesses typically are seen and not heard, aside from just that initial thing. And then we go on with the notarization. So the other thing is that the notarization is not the same as an apostille. So I don't know if you guys want me to go into that, but sometimes there are questions as far as the notarization versus apostille, completely different. Apostilles need to go into the capital to be able to get, all of that stuff done. So it's not the same.
I
Um,
see.
the other thing is that when you present the notarizations to your clients, I kind of touched on it, but you want to make sure that they are comfortable with it as well. Typically, it's their first time ever hearing about remote online notarization. So if you introduce it as this big scary thing, they're going to treat it as such. And so if you treat it as like okay, yeah, this is something that is going to take about 20 minutes, And then we're going to go ahead and go on with our day. It does make a difference as far as client acceptance rates. And so usually I send them over an explanation. Remote online notarization is a combination of Zoom and DocuSign combined. It's going to take about 25 minutes. You need this stuff. And then I also send over the sign-on guide. And so if you guys want to after this and you want my sign-on guide, I am more than happy to give that to you. But typically you want to make a sign-on guide that is specific for whatever platform that you are using. So it'll say like, okay, click on this button and then go over here and click on this. And so it helps them get through the process. It will also cut down on the uh, panicked calls 10 minutes before or 10 minutes after the notarization is supposed to happen, where they're like, I don't know what to do. And so be proactive. Otherwise, you're not going to have a good time with this. Um, and so you want to make sure that they are going through. Also, if you are training a notary within your platform, within your office to be able to do this, you want to make sure that that person is doing mock sessions and not just jumping right into the actual notarizations without learning the software because no one is going to have a good time. So the first time that you're doing a notarization is, or the first time that you're practicing with the software should not be with a real client. Okay, so key takeaways. Sometimes it can be hit or miss when I do these presentations if people think that this is going to be something that is going to be useful for their practice or not. But I will say that the types of notarizations or the types of clients that do need this are limitless. And so sometimes it can be as simple as a mom that doesn't want to cart three kids into your office, or sometimes it can be, as delicate as a military member in an undisclosed location that needs to be able to sign a power of attorney for his wife to be able to close on a property down here. So I've seen all kinds of different types of scenarios where they need to, or just because they don't want to come into an office or go to a bank. And so this has been a very, very useful option to be able to at least give to your clients. So that way you are also becoming more of an asset to your client base. So let me see, what time do I have? Okay, actually, all right. So I wanted to open it up for if anyone has any questions, and then also to thank you guys for the opportunity to present in front of you. I hope that this has been helpful. If you'd like to work with me a little bit further, I have all of my information right here. Um, I'm more than happy for you to email me or call me with any type of quick question or, hey, Katie, I have a weird scenario. That's fine. I've been doing this for a long enough time that you can ask me anything, and I can usually provide a solution or an answer.
Amazing. Thank you, Katie. Do we have any questions? Any suggestions for an interactive mock session that does not include a subscription, membership, etc.?
So, yeah, I mean, I can do one for you guys if you ever want to, but in general, if you wanted to do it on your own, if you sign up with Blue Notary, you'll be able to see kind of what it looks like. You will sign up as a notary, and then you won't be able to do any actual notarizations, but they do have a test with a friend option. Don't do the paid version, just do the free version in the very beginning to learn the software. And then once you kind of see if it works for you, then you can go on to the paid version. But in general, on my YouTube, I have a lot of different mock versions of how to be able to go through the different types of notarizations, and actual examples of what it looks like um, for an actual session. But in general, if you ever wanted to do a one-on-one where I put you through a mock session, I'm more than happy to do that. I call them discovery calls, where basically I just put you through your paces as far as doing a notarization and then show you what it looks like.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
And another question. Um, quote, I had to step out for a moment. Can you give the info regarding Social Security numbers again?
Yes. Okay. So if you have a client that does not have a social security number, typically we are very, very lucky in the state of Florida that we are allowed to do the biometric facial recognition instead. So instead of doing the knowledge-based authentication questions where it pulls from a social security number, um, the way around that is to do the biometric facial scan. And so let's say you have an international client that is coming over from Brazil and they want to be able to notarize documents for their home, or this happens a lot in immigration. So let's say there is a minor that wants to be able to travel to go see mom in Guatemala, but mom is stuck in Guatemala right now. She'll be able to go through the ID verification of a biometric instead of doing the social security number. And so the way to do that is a biometric face scan. And so that's usually the best use case for um, when you have clients that don't have social security numbers.
Okay, great. Do I have your permission to send out to post the presentation
Yes.
with this? Okay, great.
Yep.
So just so everyone's aware, we have been recording, and I will post the recording as well as the presentation to our Join It platform, our membership platform, and I will send out an email to all of you as well who's registered with the course number and a link to that recording and presentation. So once I get that posted here this afternoon, I will send out an email with the course number. It is the course numbers in the chat as well, but just so you have it via email as well as the um, recording. Um, you mentioned you had a YouTube channel, Katie.
I do.
Do
I
you have
do.
what's the name of the YouTube channel, or could you send me a link to it and I'll send that out as well?
Yeah, so that's just under my name.
Okay.
It's just under my name. It's under Katie Tremulis. So I do a lot of different trainings and like talk a lot about notarizations. And so if you wanted to go ahead and check that out, or I'm super active on my Instagram because I talk a lot about social media marketing, and then all things pertaining remote online notarization. So yeah, it's just under my name, and then the Instagram is under my company, so Notary SWFL.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. Let's see if there were any questions. I did have it. What platform would you recommend to become a certified RON agent? Do you have a recommendation for that?
Yes, yes. Okay, so this is going to save you a bunch. If you need to go through to become a in-person notary, go through the state of Florida, they have a free training rather than any of the other places that is going to charge you $400 to be able to become an in-person notary. And then also if you go through the training, I recommend the Florida Land and Title Association. They have an excellent training program and it's $30. So that's also going to save you a bunch of money for when you're becoming a remote online notary. And then you just follow the steps that are laid out in the Secretary of State to kind of get all of those ducks in a row. But also on my YouTube, I have two different tutorials on how to become a in-person and a remote online notary in the state of Florida.
Awesome. Do you mind sharing what you charge for RON services, or is it
Yeah.
okay?
No, I don't mind at all. So in general, my base price is $100 for like a simple document. So let's say it's anywhere between 1 to 3 pages, it's $100 base. If it is a more complex, it does get a little bit more expensive. And then if I need to provide witnesses, it's $25 per witness. If it is, let's say, real estate, or if there is something of a MSA, parenting plan, anything like that, typically the base price is $150 to $200.
Right, perfect. All right. Do we have any other questions? I think I covered them in the chat. If I missed your question in the chat, if you wouldn't mind putting it up for me again real quick, I think I got them all. All right, I'm not seeing any more, but thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate you taking your time to do this for us and providing your expertise. Again, just to recap, I will post the recording and send out an email to all of you who registered. And also, don't forget to register for our bench and barbecue on April 16th. I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Thank you.